Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first edition of the Micro Frontends Meetup. So, since we're all new here, but we already have been to the Micro Frontends conference, I guess. Welcome to this new meetup. It's a new format that we will now do pretty much every month. Let's see where we go from there. And with that being said, let's also have a look at some of the things to have a little bit of an organizational overview before we introduce our two guests. So, first of all, we are streaming live, but this is also recorded and will be available on YouTube after the live stream. So you will always get access to it if you don't make it, if you need to go out. Whatever the reasons are, there will be a URL made available and you will get access to that via either the meetup or via LinkedIn or via whatever channel you prefer. Also, the URL you're using right now for YouTube, for instance, will be the URL later on. So this is, of course, great. If you ask questions, etc., those will be presented on the stream and they will be live, and also the chat replay will be live. So keep that in mind. These things are meant to stick a little bit. If you have a problem with that and still want to ask a question, just write us on LinkedIn or your preferred channel that is a little bit more private. Second thing, as already mentioned, the chat activity is recorded, but in general, the activity there is much appreciated. So if you have any questions, just want to say hello. It's always nice to get some responses and feedback. Also keep in mind that we have quite great guests here, so ask them a lot of questions and be there quite pushy, right? Get to know their knowledge and really their projects. But one, of course, important reminder, always be positive and gentle in the questions. So we have a code of conduct, please respect that. And everything will be fine if we're all just treating ourselves like human beings. Great. Another thing, just in general, if you want to be a guest on the show, if you have something to share about your journey for Micro Frontends, if you, in general, have a cool project that you want to talk about, just tell us, and we try to make an appointment, and you're on the show. So feel free to reach out to us, and we are happy to have you here. We will make something work, I promise. And final thing, it's not tested. Sorry if there are still some bugs in there, but this is quite fresh. I just made the last commit, and hopefully it will not just burn down immediately. But anyway, so we got the survey of the state of Micro Frontends 2023 out there. It's been a while, I know. The last one was, I think, in 2020. And so this time it's not using Google Forms, actually its own homepage, and the code of the page is also on GitHub if you want to check that out. We will discuss it certainly in the next edition, and hopefully already some results are back in. But in the meantime, we'd appreciate any kind of feedback and, of course, filling out the survey. Don't do it right now. Stay with us and be active in the meetup. Do that later, but bookmark it and join us there. Would be much appreciated. Also, of course, this is fluid. So the great thing about it is if you have another question that should be definitely asked and is not in there, also reach out to us. So we are happy to expand that and really cover the broadest area possible. So just make sure that you are there. Right. And with that being said, let's roll a video from our sponsors and then, let's introduce our first guests. Great. Okay, PowerCloud, you should check it out if you have anything to do with microphone discovery. This will help you a lot. And now, it's my pleasure to welcome our first guest, Dimitri. Hi, how are you doing, man?
Hi, Florian. Very good.
Hi.
Thank you
Hi.
so much
So,
for inviting me.
yeah, you're the first guest on this brand new show, so this will be in the history books, I guess. It's a pleasure to have you. And you're not alone. I have to say, Dimitri is the CEO and founder of Mecom Solutions, and he will present a cool project, Ozone. But he did not come alone. We also have, for the technical part, we have Ian also in the room. So welcome also, Ian.
Hi, great to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I would say let's just make the round full, that we don't need to keep our third or second guest, how you want to view it, also waiting. That's Benjamin. Let's also invite Benjamin to the stage.
Hello.
Hi. Cool. So now we are already complete, and here we are, right? This is a little round. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna present first, I would say, Ozone. So Dimitri will start and will give us a little bit of insights on that solution, and then I would say let's also jump into questions, and then afterwards let's cover. Benjamin is doing. Dimitri, could you maybe introduce yourself first? What are you doing, and what Ozone is all about?
Sure. So my name is Dimitri Renault. I'm the CEO of Mecom Solutions. We're a digital health agency. So we basically help organizations, health facilities, healthcare programs to implement digital health solutions, mostly around the topic of the electronic medical record. So helping projects out there to digitize the clinical and medical workflows. So we've been doing that for, I would say, almost 10 years now, and always with open source solutions, and mostly solutions developed around a product called OpenMRS, which stands for Open Medical Record System. So we've always helped projects out there implement the medical record using a variation, a distribution of sorts of OpenMRS. And through the years, we could cross-check requirements and see that there was definitely space for a product that could be recycled and that could help basically scale this whole operation better. And this is how Ozone came to life. And Ozone is basically an integrated health information system that revolves around OpenMRS, revolves around the electronic medical record system, but also adds other components to it, such as a laboratory system, a billing component, an inventory component to manage drugs and other medical supplies, and also a BI platform for obviously visualizing, health indicators, KPIs of sorts, and plus all this with the usual enterprise expectations, I would say, like security, single sign-on, user management, and so on and so forth. And so when we decided to go for Ozone, we really wanted a modern and, if possible, disruptive experience for the electronic medical record system that would be at the center of it. And this is how we started being very involved in the development of OpenMRS version 3. And this is a version 3, I think, that we're going to discuss today, because that new version of OpenMRS is coming with a new front-end experience, and that new front-end experience is basically leveraging micro frontends. And yeah, so that's how everything plugs together. I hope this helps. I will provide a link to the Ozone website in the comments as well for those who want to check and start digging. Over.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the insights. I think you also brought a live demo that you wanted to show. Should we put it on the screen, and you want to guide us through that we can see how it looks like?
Also, I did not necessarily plan for a live demo. There is actually a live demo, it's true, on the Ozone website. But to be honest, it's going to be it's going to be risky. I can click, we can try, we can have a look. I'm sure some of it will be okay. I mean, what we need to actually keep in mind here is that whilst I will share my screen so you can see some of it indeed. Are you on it? Are you sharing
it's
the screen?
all it's all there. It's all live.
Oh, okay. So basically, when logging to Ozone, the first thing that happens basically is that we access the EMR system. So this is how the navigation is conceived at the moment. But you can see on the top right, when you click on the app menu, you can see that other components are available: a pharmacy system, billing system, laboratory system, and a reporting and analytics system. This is today the way, the sort of like quick and easy way that we allow users to navigate between the different components that are integrated. This will probably be retold differently in the future, but this is how it is. But anyway, at the beginning, what we see here is that indeed we land into OpenMRS 3, which is the EMR system that I mentioned, and that's the one that is built with Micro Frontends. So yeah, we can look for a patient. So that would be the typical flow. You can try maybe Mary or an identifier. You can click on it. This takes you now to the patient chart, which is the beginning really of the clinician user experience in a electronic medical record system. So we can see on the left-hand side that there's a couple of sections that can be navigated across, starting with the patient summary where you were. That is basically given. Okay, there's not much demo data here, but I think people can start projecting themselves, vitals, biometrics, conditions, diagnosis, maybe active medications. I mean, all sort of things that are the one that you're seeing here is rather intended for outpatient care. So this is a kind of a typical chart navigation for managing outpatients. And yeah, basically, that's in a nutshell. I don't know if people want to really dive into the details of electronic medical record system, but yeah, it's all about data collection. We have to imagine that the clinician is basically sitting in front of a patient and is doing their consultation with them, and will, this is a tricky part, but collect data as they go at the point of service delivery, at the point of care delivery. So this is all the trick of electronic medical record systems. That's the challenge, is to manage to do that and to do it effectively. Like, for instance, typing temperature, blood pressure, all that whilst interacting with the patient and not losing the contact with the patient, being present for the patient. So this is the trick. This is the complication and the challenge. There's a lot of UX research and design that was actually put into it and keeps being put into it to maximize and optimize this experience whilst going with it, and to disrupt as little as possible of the clinical healthcare delivery, right? So yeah, that's basically it. Now, there's a couple of people here, including yourselves, actually, Florian. You've been involved in the architecture of this system technically. All that we see here is mostly a React-based front end. Not all of it, actually, and that's also interesting. And that this was a big advantage of using Micro Frontends, is that when we put together OpenMRS 3, most of it was done again from scratch, pretty much based, on the experience of existing versions and legacy versions of OpenMRS, of course, but it was redone. But there were some components that we had already, some front-end application that we had already, and that we did not necessarily want to rewrite as a way, to move forward. And I'm specifically thinking about the form engine, and that's exactly where you are, right? So basically, when going through a patient consultation, we can customize or configure rather a number of forms depending on the clinical context that we want to use, such as you clicked, I don't know, maybe laboratory tests. It's not a very beautiful form, but it actually helps at the moment keying in other tests. So yeah, you can look for, I don't know, hemoglobin or something like that, or whatever. You can add them and then save, and yeah, exactly. And so, but what's interesting is that this little form that we just saw is actually not written in React. It's an existing form engine that we had that was actually done in Angular. I don't remember the exact version now, if it's 6 or 8 at the moment where we integrated it. But what this framework, this architecture that we have here, helped us do is actually just do that pretty much seamlessly.
Mhm.
The only thing that we had to do was to adapt the design system to this legacy form engine.
Mhm.
And it's good to note as well that part of the design process here was about choosing, a design system, and we chose Carbon for those who haven't recognized it. So the only thing that we had to do to get this seamlessly integrated, as we just saw, was to actually carbonize this existing form engine that wasn't in the first place.
Mhm.
But I really like this example. It's a case where we can see that we can still leverage legacy technology pretty much seamlessly. That was not a big effort to actually do that. Whereas building a form engine for an EMR application like OpenMRS is really a big deal. So this actually saved us many hundreds hours of developers and others to be involved. We didn't have to do that. We could just re-embed our good old Angular based form engine, in waiting for like maybe a roadmap to develop a new one whatsoever. So yeah, this is one of the big advantages here. And another one that we need to mention, I think, go ahead.
Yeah, we have also a question in the chat, and I think there's also a good point in time to take Ian back on stage, because it is, partially organizational, partially technical. So let me get the question in here. So from Tanya, how granular are the micro frontends, and in particular referring to the splitting strategy here? So I don't know who wants to take it from the two of you. Ian?
It's very variable. I think we have in the application maybe 50 micro frontends or so that are of various sizes depending on their point. So like the component that we're looking at here in the patient chart, actually every single one of these menu items on the left is a separate micro front end, because they all a separate micro front end, like the vitals micro front end or the visits micro front end bundles this visits view and a few other pieces that show up on this screen here. The medications has this medications thing, as well as our order entry system. It looks like this. But we also have in other parts of the system some larger micro front ends that are more the size of a traditional application. Just thinking like this is maybe not the right thing to demonstrate because that's a very new thing. But the dispensing app, for example, here, this is all done as one micro front end. This is intended to support an entire pharmacy workflow where they can go through, they can display pending orders, they can update those orders, they can modify the orders as needed. And all of that is just implemented as that. We're generally splitting our micro front ends. Our strategy is somewhere along the lines of what we consider an application feature, if that makes sense. This is a strategy that works for us because of, micro front end splitting strategies often reflect the organization, and the way OpenMRS is organized is very complicated, but we tend to group around specific features that different people want, and so that's been the natural level to split things at.
Cool. There's another question from the chat that I want to take in. This time from Peter. How do you handle shared state? Is it only inter-app communication and no shared state? What's the take here?
It's once again a whole variety of solutions. In general, we're using Zustand in the back end or in the back end of the front end to provide shared state within the front end application. Some parts of the state are parts of the back end application that are integrated via that, and in a few cases, apps communicate different parts of the shared state, like our patient chart basically propagates a patient context down through. I discussed how all of these are different apps down through all of these apps. That's actually mostly done through prop sharing. So it's a variety of different strategies depending on how coupled things are, basically.
Understood. So it's, just to recap, there are a variety of things, but I think what we see mostly here is that you use components from other micro frontends, potentially loosely coupled, right? We have some, let me take one word from the Pyral world, extension components, right? That you can register somewhere, and if they're not there, it doesn't matter, right? And this way you always ensure that the application is essentially working, no matter if now there's a microphone and filling in that gap or not, right? Okay. Great. Another question. There's a follow-up question based on the one with the splitting from Davidas. How the granularity is handled from an organizational point of view. I mean, you explained very nicely that's feature-based, but the question is then, is it owned then by a team? I guess then a team can own multiple micro frontends, right? Or what's your take here?
Yeah, so the concept of a team is a little bit hard because of how OpenMRS is structured. OpenMRS is primarily an open source community for develop, or OpenMRS as a community is an open source community with a variety of partners and organizations. Mekong we are one of the heaviest contributors to this, but there are other organizations involved, other teams with other priorities, which is why I was saying our granularity is usually based around features, because we have 10 organizations contributing code to different parts of these components, and so that means the people working on one particular micro front end might come from 10 different organizations, right? So it's hard to say that that's a cohesive team that owns the thing. It's yeah.
Okay, so it's at the end, it's just a feature, maybe let's say a repository, but it could be also, of course, multiple microphones in a single repository. But this is a place where the multiple people can contribute, and the only thing that makes up this microphone is that you can now integrate it in your application, right? So that it is a feature in your application
Exactly.
that you can then say, I want to grab in, or I don't want to have it, and then you to exclude it from your distribution or your instance of OpenMRS. Okay, understood. Great. Also, I mean, there are more and more questions coming in. You're not on the hot seat. So next one, and we didn't really go into technical details, but I think that would be now a good thing to explain a little bit. I mean, we heard it's all React-based, but what is it using underneath? So the next question from Tanya is, how and at which time are the microphones integrated? So what's the orchestrator, right? Client side, server side, edge side?
It's a little bit as with every question. I feel like I'm answering. It doesn't have a single straightforward answer, but most simply, we're using what I like to think of as a very dynamic version of module federation to provide most of our front ends. And what I mean by that is that our front ends are all defined as micro front-end containers that are loaded as dynamic remotes using an import map to bridge between that. If that's too complicated, it basically means we have a registry with all of our applications that explains when and where they're supposed to be loaded, and then based on that, we pull code as components need to be rendered on screen. We pull them in, so it's all effectively integrated at client side at runtime, but based on some things that are pre-built into the distribution, if that makes sense.
Got it. So there's no dynamic front-end discovery, so that's predetermined when you roll it out already, let's say server side, but or build time actually, I guess most of the time, or in pretty much all instances. But then at client side, they're actually coming in the JavaScript pieces, and they form the application as it is. So it's a single page application at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, it's a single page application, and we've been working kind of hard so far to keep it so that the single page application is just static files. There's no Express server or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Although
got it.
although obviously there are some advantages to server-side rendering, and we are looking at how we can implement, how we might be able to integrate that into, the stuff that we're doing already.
Okay, then maybe let's take one last question before we also let Benjamin introduce his project, and then we can all together have a discussion. So from VG, what are the main challenges you face during development and how you navigate it? We would like to know if someone is adopting microphones and what things to keep in mind.
The main, I think the main challenges so one of the main things I think that Micro Frontends allows us to do is it actually keeps the barrier to contributing for new contributors quite low, right? You can go into any one of our Micro Frontend repositories and tweak things, and since it's nice and self-contained, you tweak things, it affects the screens that you're trying to affect, and not anything else. And that means that most of our contributors can be fairly ignorant about how this system all stitches together, which is, I think, the goal, especially in a context where we have so many different organizations coming in and out and people with so many different skill levels contributing. One of the challenges then has been having the sort of expertise that knows how all of this stuff gets integrated and runs together, and can make sure that we're continuing to do things and structure things in sensible and the best ways possible. As with everything, our main challenges have not been technical. They're organizational, they're communication, they're prioritization. They're all of the other stuff that go around this. We have gone through several evolutions of how we're dealing with micro frontends. I think at the very beginning of this journey, we were using single SPA, and we were using single SPA pretty much at the way that they lay out. They have a recommended setup, and we were using that. And for a variety of reasons, that doesn't really work for our implementers. Mostly because single SPA ends up requiring that you have a root configuration that knows everything about your application, and this was very hard to maintain. We've moved into this much more dynamic direction, thanks in large part to Florian, in fact. And this has been a major win for us in terms of making our application very easy for implementers to use. But yeah, the main challenges are all
I'm just a spectator now. I think what they did is great. So all good. Great. Maybe then, since we also got this last one in, and maybe also Dimitri can share, because you've been also part when this whole thing was, of course, instantiated. Let's say the question from David does: what are the major benefits of the microfront architectures that, let's say, encourage to pick up this approach in the first place? So was it really the development setup that Ian just described, or is it maybe some other technical things that were there on the road?
Well, no, OpenMRS has always been highly modular. It was already the case in older version of the software, and we had run into limitations with these legacy versions of the modularity. So I think we were definitely looking for a way to improve that, and this is where Micro Frontend helped a lot. And I think for that, it's still definitely a win. I don't really see what could have been an alternative given the constraints we were operating under. The developer experience, it came maybe second. It's a big win now. I don't think that was necessarily the primary objective when we started with it, but it's true that now it makes a huge difference. As you can all imagine, we have a lot of in-kind contributors, volunteers, stuff like that. We certainly cannot I would say divert our resources into training these guys that sometimes come and go very quickly. So the fact that the DevX is so improved is a big win. But modularity, and what I said at the beginning with the Angular framework, we were sort of sort of self-selling ourselves on that. Like, it will be great. People will be able to do something in Vue, in React, in Angular. And, at the end of the day, that didn't really happen. We have a big win in the specific area that we discussed earlier. But in fact, this is not really what happened. And there's been discussion of making this like a React first framework and so on. So yeah, I think along the way, the wins changed, but the modularity, I think that's the key thing. And it's a big win at the end of the day, for sure.
Okay. Maybe one last statement from me, and let's see if you agree, because this is what I hear out of it. Usually, if you have, let's say, a monolithic application and that grows and grows, and let's say you still have a good architecture underneath, right? So no, we're not talking spaghetti here, but someone really put in some thoughts. Usually the level of, let's say, that the developers come in on average will also, at least, I mean, it will not really go down, but will always be on a high level and maybe even go up with the, let's say, size and complexity of the application. But with micro frontends, it sounds like you need, of course, maybe a couple of one or at least one, but better maybe 2 or 3 people that really know how this thing works and can set it up, and therefore, of course, have a high level. But then the main advantage, at least that I heard, is that you can have, on average, more junior developers also coming in, because, I mean, what they see is usually more like greenfield applications, and I mean, they can't really make something. I mean, they can always damage something, but the attack area is really low compared to, let's say, a larger application. And I mean, they also get the idea of the surface that they need to work on much easier. Would you agree to that statement? Does it make sense? Or would you say I'm on the wrong?
No, it's absolutely true that it like with our previous approach, we did have a previous more monolithic but modular approach to front ends prior to this, and it was you're right, it was getting to the point where it was very hard for new contributors to come in and contribute features in a way that didn't break a bunch of other things that were already working. And so that had led us to some UI inertia. And one of the great things about the micro frontend architecture is it's allowed us to free some of that up and rethink how things, work. And we're actually getting to a point where we're starting to fundamentally redesign how the app works as a result of having this new sort of ease of adding new features to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. All right. With that being said, I would then switch for the moment, but we'll all come together in a few minutes again, and we have more questions from the audience that then we will pick up. So stay tuned for that discussion. And sorry for now moving over, or not sorry. Actually, much appreciated from my side. I will now move over to Benjamin. Hi again. Sorry for have you waiting there. And
interesting stream.
Yeah, but I think it's not. I mean, same level of interesting right now, right? So not less interesting. So, can you introduce us a bit to Axinom and your project?
Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe you can share my slides already. So because I have a couple of them, and I can try to rush through them a little bit. But yeah, I think the most value would be in a Q&A session. But yeah, so what we're doing is we're actually a company founded in here we go 2001 in Fürth, Germany. So actually not too far from you guys, but that was not the reason why we chose you. We only learned that after the fact. And what we do, don't read the fine print on the slide. So we're creating basically since our beginning content management systems in various shapes and forms. And as soon as internet videos became a thing, we basically were involved in media management applications. So like there's a lot that goes on in like the back end before a consumer like us can sit on the sofa and tune in to some favorite subscriptional VOD channel or live channel or whatever. And well, we are working with big media companies in that field, like ZDF, BBC, Sky, DAZN, and building solutions for them, how they can effectively manage their backend processing pipelines to get the content to the consumers. as another field, and we're using basically this product that I'm now talking a bit about, where we also use the micro frontends, which is called Axonum Mosaic. And we also use that product, but just as a side note, we also use that in software for airlines and aircraft. So there's also a ton of, well, on the one hand, potentially even in-flight entertainment systems that are pretty similar actually to the internet video on demand platforms. But also, like, there's a ton of other stuff and software that needs to be managed and needs to get like into the aircraft and from the aircraft and stuff like that. So there's also a lot of management there. And what we did is basically we came up with a software stack that is looking a bit like that. So this is how a typical media application looks like. So it's quite complex if you imagine it, and it's quite different domains actually. So you start from having somewhere a video processing pipeline where you get your video from the production studio. Potentially you have very special security concerns there, that the videos don't end up on a torrent before they end up in your streaming solution, right? Then of course the whole digital right management, and then enriching the video files with metadata and images, and think about like, or implementing monetization solutions around it, localization, and so on and so on. And what we learned over the time is that, so of course, many of these domains are quite independent and like have very high, let's say, very technical domains where you need to have high expertise to understand like what's going on there and what are the requirements, but they are fairly independent. So if I manage, I don't know, a title for a movie, I'm not interested necessarily in how that movie came from the Hollywood studio to my disk or to the disk in the data center in particular. And so this is like already a sign that it may not be like one application that we're talking here, but it's a sign that, well, things are probably better to be broken off into at least microservices, I guess. But if you think it further, then obviously also micro frontends. And what comes in addition to that is that we detected over the years that there are many things where stuff is kind of standardizable. So DRM and video encoding, for instance, there are defined best practices out there. There are codecs, there are protection mechanisms and stuff like that. And well, yeah, you need to be expert on that field, but it's like there's not. There's a well-known set of features that you want to have, but then on the other hand, when it gets to, let's say, what are the properties of my movie? How do I curate it? How do I present it to the user? What do I collect about it and stuff like that? There's a lot of stuff that is not standardizable, and where all these companies have very, very specific needs and very specific demands, also like how the stuff should work, that they also differentiate from others and stuff like that. So that's what you see on that screen here, basically reflected with like two different shades of blue. So we have dark blue services where we say like, okay, these are services that can be rather boxed and we can offer them as a software as a service. But then there are these light blue bubbles that are things where we say like, okay, this is highly opinionized depending on like the project, depending on the software stack or like the platform that you're building. And what we do there is basically we have an open source template for these services, but we allow you to customize them, or our customers to customize them, which, when you think about it, then leads to the case that you will have micro frontends actually coming not only from different teams but also different companies. And all of that basically should be combined in an editorial interface where, in best case, the user of that system or of that editorial interface doesn't understand or does not need to understand that these are different processes, different things developed by different companies, and it just should feel like a seamless experience, no matter in which area you go. But underneath, there are multiple teams from different companies contributing, everything like at runtime, composing together the experience that the manager or the editor then will get. So maybe a quick word still about Mosaic. So this is a bit of different version of that same graph. I think the focus here is more about the techniques, like the technologies that we have, that we use. So we have like utilities around that makes it easy to write these services. So we have backend helpers and templates, and as I said, like managed services that are just like turnkey solutions. You can turn them on and you have that domain basically covered in your application. And we develop basically an ecosystem for developers that can help you to achieve like the 80% cases that are the things that we know from our experience that media companies have and they need to manage. And then in the 20% cases where it's highly specific, we always design our stuff that we don't want to stand in your way. So in the end, it's a developer that is there, and we cannot predict every use case, every potential use case, how you can, what you cannot come up with. I mean, this is exactly the thing that sets the platforms also apart, right? They have product developers, product engineers, product designers that understand like what is the next new thing. So we want to make sure that we kind of support these things. In best case, we have some helpers around that help the developer speed up that process. In worst case, there's nothing that he can use, and he can then just step out and he just uses like, let's say, plain React, plain Node.js, Express, whatever. So we're not in the way if it gets highly specific, but we're helping when it's when it's in the 80% cases where like a lot of it is like CRUD operations, obviously, like you get some data, you need to store it somewhere, and then maybe trigger further. But let's come to Micro Frontends, because this is now not a sales talk for Mosaic. We can have that another time. So yes, what about Micro Frontends, right? So the numbers, take them with a grain of salt, because this is like, as I said, they are like customized pilots that will come and that are developed basically by customers, and they can be however many. So this is, and also like our services and what we build, we still continue building new things and whatever. So this is actually, I went this morning through the repository and I had a look and I counted the numbers. So of course we have one Pyral instance. So this is the main goal, right? So we want to have one unified experience where the editors log in and they can control like the whole flow, and independent of which service actually is behind it. Could also be a legacy service that existed already before we started this thing, so we can integrate with these as well. And then we have like 9 and more managed pilots already that we ship, and this is like the turnkey solution that I talked earlier about. So you can just say like, okay, I want to have video management. You put a checkbox in there, and then we basically deploy, or like we activate that pilot in your version of the management system, and you will get all these features that this Micro Frontend, as well as the backend service, obviously, because that comes always in a pair, will have. So an indefined amount of customized pilots. I think by default we have like one in the template that cares for all that metadata management, let's say. But of course, like it's really up to the domain for also develop more on the customized side. So where our customers are, implementing their needs. 100 plus pages we have so far right now. It's still growing. There are more and more things getting added. We have extensions where, and these are only like the extensions where we from our managed pilots basically share things. So these are Pyral extensions where we have like provide services from our managed pilots, or from our software as a service turnkey solution pilots, to be used in the other pilots. So think about like you have or I can even show, I think. But okay, let's first look at the other screen. Let's go one by one. So if we have a look there, this is like how the application looks like. It looks actually on a technical level pretty similar to what we saw earlier, because it's also like a data management application. Just a little bit of a different flavor, I guess. But this is like the landing page experience that we have right now. So you can see when I click one more time, maybe. Yeah. You can see like the composition of it. So we have like a brief shell around it where we have like the common concerns for the main navigation, breadcrumbs, user profile information, etc., etc. We have a little bit of a footer where we have a list of, that's mainly for us actually, like for developers, where we see like which versions of pilots are currently running in that environment. And stuff like that. We have a shelf that is on the left hand side that is provided by the application, by the shell application, by the Pyro instance, but filled by a pilot. So we have an easier time to update it. So the shell application just reserves a spot, declares that there can be a Pyro extension coming in there, and then we have a micro frontend that actually fulfills that, which is, I guess, a nice approach to decouple that domain as well, and have it independent from your actual like application instance. And then the green area is basically where the routing happens. And right now, well, there's a home pilot loaded, and this thing is not the most beautiful thing, I guess, in the world to look at. But if we navigate further, you would find pages that look similar like these. So you have a ton of properties where you can like edit and manage the stuff. On the very right hand side, you have like actions that you can like continue with the processing pipeline of that particular asset. But if you look at it from a micro frontend perspective, what we will see is basically, so the green part is actually like something that we bring in from like the customized world, so our customers can adjust that. So the properties that are maintained there, and also like the actions, how the data flows through the system, which processes are the next logical step and stuff like that. This is like a pilot in itself, but that pilot uses then an extension again from the image workflows to basically visualize that image. And also like if you have a look at that image, it has a little like dot button in there where there are advanced features that you can do on that image then, or editor can perform on that image. But the main benefit is like the separation of concern, right? So as a developer of the green part, I don't need to worry about like what this blue part does. I just know that it offers me the service. It can visualize an image. It can allow the user to guide them into the image editing experience. However that will look like, it can change from today to tomorrow. This is completely independent, and there are well-known interfaces between like the extensions and like in all the interoperabilities. Let's put it like that. It's not only extensions that are used there in this whole system, obviously. But that's actually like one of the benefits, I think. Like you have like isolated domains that can work like that can work independently, but and you can design interfaces where the domains interact with each other, and then you can manage that basically. And it's a way to prevent like the spaghettis from reaching the whole plate. You, in best case, you don't have any spaghetti at all, but if you would have spaghetti, it would then potentially be localized also to like one micro front end. And with the clear interfaces, you will not interfere with other things. I don't know, I can quickly click through a few other experiences. So this is like an assignment station where you like pick videos. So of course, here again, the whole video experience is coming from a different workflow that lists basically the video metadata. The green workflow only needs to understand, and workflow and pilot is, by the way, so we use that synonymously. So the green part only knows like the IDs of what is actually associated right now, and then asks the extension to visualize it. And if you happen to click like this blue button, the plus button, you will get a much richer experience of like a selection experience of where the video workflows actually then present you the available stock that is now valid or possible to add. Right, and there's more of these stations. It's just like a couple of examples. There's much more interaction there between the pilots. How we achieve a consistent user experience, because I think this is also an important point when it comes to micro frontends. Of course, you can put everything technically under one hood, but then in the end, if everybody does its own thing and has its own user experience, it will also be very very frustrating and very irritating potentially for a consumer of the system.
Yes.
So what we did is basically we came up with our own UI library that we ship and we provide for the pilots to use. It goes a bit further even than only like having a bit of a design language, a common design language. Yes, there are components in there that do exactly that, but we also build components that actually already have like a built-in behavior. So you get the same way how data is being saved and persisted, for instance, across the board, because this is already built in here. And also as a developer, you don't need to worry about these things. So you can worry basically about like your business needs that you want. And we try to cover a lot of the technical aspects to make it fit into the grid, if you want. We cover that from the UI library. And well, we have the screenshot here showing our storybook, which is kind of the biggest documented developer documentation around that thing. We have a few abstracts still in addition, but this is like the actual thing, right? So I mean, you see all the properties and everything, and you can even interactively play around with it. So awesome tool. If you haven't used it yet, I would recommend to give it a try if you have a similar use case. Right, maybe let's progress a little bit further still, if it allows me. Yes.
Yeah, we also have, maybe this is a good point in time to also already ask some of the questions, because I guess they might touch some of the points that we had already and some of the points that you still want to cover. So I would use the chance to actually show the question from Tanya. And she asked, what were the biggest challenges you're facing with Micro Frontends? For instance, a lot of people think it omits alignment efforts. Do you agree with that?
Not sure I get the second part of the question. But so talking about challenges, I mean, obviously with every new technology, it's always a learning curve, right? I mean, getting developers on board and getting developers familiar with the thing, and getting developers to think in that pattern, let's put it like that, that it's not all a monolith, and it's like everything is like, I know at development time already what happens at runtime, but you need to basically train also the developers to understand, okay, well, there are things that can happen at runtime. I mean, it's like, as I said, we have turnkey solution services, and they may or may not be there. So what do you do when it's not there? What is your fallback strategy? What happens? Like, how do you design it if things evolve different from each other? How do you make sure that the interfaces don't break, that you don't run out of sync, that you still maintain backward compatibility? And then, of course, like thinking about how can you give that knowledge also to third-party customers that may not have like done Micro Frontends yet, but that are interested in developing a customized data management application. But there, I think I can just repeat a bit what Ian said. I think once you get behind it, it's actually helping you because it reduces complexity that a developer needs to deal with. Because well, you only deal with the spaghettis on your plate, but not on the whole table, right? If I want to get back to that picture. Right. So if you do spaghetti, well, it's your thing, right? But you in worst case, you can throw it away because theoretically it's small enough potentially to be recreated rather quickly in a proper way. And this is also good basically for prototyping, right? So you can start something without needing to completely mature it already, test it out, see if that works. And if not, well, you can throw it away. You don't have, because you only have like these clear interfaces between the domains. So you know where, when you take that away, what would happen? It's not like you have that now in your monolith and well, you feature flag it out maybe, but the code is probably still there because nobody dares to remove it, and nobody knows what are the side effects if you would touch it. So it's easy to iterate on it.
For the second part, I think what she means is considering that, I mean, in your case, it's also feature boundaries rather, but let's say there are dedicated teams just making a dedicated pilot. would these teams now need to align or not? Because quite often, I mean, it's cited that, make your micro frontends and then the teams just run around independently, which is, of course, the dream. But I mean, what she's after is, do you also think that it omits this alignment effort in totally, or is there still some effort required?
I think in my experience, it's like it's bringing it to a healthy level, because there's some degree of freedom that you want to give the teams, right? I mean, an expert on the DRM systems, like digital right management systems and encryption of content, whatever, that's a very technical process, right? You need to have a lot of domain expertise and understand like how the process would be best designed that it fulfills the needs and stuff like that. So why should that guy need to worry about, like, I don't know, how the title, what the length of the title of the movie should be in the end, or how an image can be shipped to a customer, to an end user. So it gives everybody like the degree of freedom within its domain. Of course, I mean, we have the UI library, for instance, that tries to harmonize then the experience that are getting built. And we also have like a thing like system-wide design review. So what we do is basically we design, when some micro frontend actually decides like they want to implement this and that workflow, so these stations, we will have a look at that basically on our like design board and understand like, does that work together? Does that fit the design language of the other one, so it gets to a harmonic experience? But a lot of that actually we achieve already through the UI library. So the pieces fall already into the right places. Of course, this ends potentially when you think about third-party companies, right? I mean, we cannot tell them like what they should do, but we can give them instructions. We can give them, as I said, the UI library that harmonizes the user experience. And the alignment efforts, to come back to that, I think what it helps is like it drives the alignment efforts in the areas where there is actually alignment needed, where there is actually like interfaces where on the metadata, I need an image, I need a video, right? I don't care like how the video was produced, how it's encrypted, what's the codec of it and stuff like that, right? I need a video because in the end, the customer doesn't want to watch read a pretty text and watch an image, but they want to have a video. But that's not my concern if I'm on the metadata management. Still, I interact with these guys that prepare the stuff and talk with them and align with them basically, like what is the interface? What can they provide? What do I consume then? And then, you work together basically on these pieces. And therefore, I think it's alignment at the right places instead of when you're on a monolith and basically everything needs to be aligned with everybody because potentially I add a CSS class and that breaks something. I mean, okay, that can still happen in microfrontends as well, but
sure. All right, then maybe before we go to the next question, one comment from David does. They used your system at university to learn adaptive streaming. I just want to say that is a great system and was very smooth also documentation too. So some kudos here.
Cool, thanks for
you and your team for setting up such a great solution. Now from VG, what are the protocols and guidelines that you had set in place for the app dev teams? We would like to hear mainly about design systems for uniformity, state management, common concerns like authentication, navigation, etc.
Yeah, so I mean, a bit of that I guess I covered, so I may not want to repeat everything because otherwise we drop people, I guess, from the stream and nobody's interested anymore. But a lot of that is basically achieved through our UI library, which is like not just a design system, but as I said, it's like it defines like how the interaction even works. Like we have a form station component, for instance, then that defines like that is the component that decides when state is getting or should get persisted. Yes, the code that actually then persists is something that the developer needs to do, but the developer doesn't, because it could be any backend, right? That's the reason. We also have helpers, obviously, to talk against our services, but we also support cases where we have just the front-end part, but there's a legacy service, for instance, or a service that is hard to replace. But the whole interaction is not something that the workflow developer needs to decide. So they would fall to the default behavior already by default by using the components from the UI library because they have that baked in. Asterisk. Nobody forces people to use the UI library. It's again the 80-20 thing, right? So if you have something that is very specific to your use case, you can still decide to say like, okay, whatever Aximon came up with there doesn't fit my needs at that moment. So then I'm basically at React level. I can try to find the visual components in the UI library. They are there. Use them so it looks the same, but I potentially implement a different behavior. But by default, you would not volunteer to do that without a good reason, right? Because nobody wants to overspend like efforts just because reinventing the wheel is so nice. That's what we like about authentication, navigation, and that stuff. So we have authentication actually in our application. Like we have authentication solved actually on like the root level. So you cannot open the application without being an authenticated user. So you need to do an SSO or whatever type of authentication before you even get in there. And then for authorization, we have actually like we have a couple of things in place that on the one hand, and maybe I can even switch to that slide really quick. Let me try to get that aligned here. Where is it? It's, I think, this one, for instance. So whenever you register a page, so this is one level of authorization that we have. So when we register a page, maybe not everybody knows, there is actually a third parameter that you can give to the registration, not only the route and the component, but you can.
So this is using Pyro, just for the audience that they know this is not something you came up with, but this is in Pyro baked in thing that pilots can use. So pilots are micro frontends in that space. They can use register page to just register a page component, right?
You're right, exactly. And then what we do here is basically we use that Pyro thing that or the method that Pyro allows us to set custom data with the registration. So we ask basically the one who registers that page and defines the component and like what happens on that page. Basically, they also define they should define like what are the permissions needed to access the page. This is like one system, and like this is something that is easy to be done, right? I mean, it's still something to decide per station. There could be stations that don't require any special needs, any special authorization beside authentication. So a user needs to be there. But making it easy basically to fulfill these needs. I think this is the goal here that developers default or like have an easy way to default to the right behavior. If you then go further and you want to have like within the station still a separation, like, okay, if the user has this permission or that permission, I react a bit different. I allow different actions and stuff like that. There are also methods in there in our plethora of packages that we have on NPM basically for different concerns. So there are ones in there that you can use like to that define helper methods for achieving all these things. As I said, like we try to cover the most bases through helpers already. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel and you get also consistent behavior. So I think maybe that's the answer with a lot of words.
Maybe a last question before we bring Ian and Dimitri back into his stream, and then we have also a more general question, and I think starting a more general discussion. Because from David does, because we just mentioned Pyro. For how long are you using Pyro?
That's probably like 3 to 4 years, I guess. I hope I'm not lying, right? It's that long around.
I mean, you need to know. I just know. I mean we launched Pyro like in 2019, so it can be 3 to 4 years. Yeah.
So we used it quite early
from the beginning on.
We used it with 0. I don't know. I remember that 0.11 was a version that we were using, I think.
Yeah.
So we basically pretty much since not at the very beginning of the product. Actually, in the very beginning of the product, we did not tackle that concern yet. But in the like relatively soon after we started, like with the product, we were starting using Pyro already. Yes, and therefore, it's a settled thing. I mean, the thing is also like there's not too much that we actually do to keep it up and to keep it running and whatever, right? So I mean, it's there. It's a central piece. Yes, we write more and more extensions. We write more and more plugins for certain use cases that pilots can interact with the shell or with each other nicer or better or whatever. But actually, it just sits there and it's like it's working, right? So
Let's maybe also highlight again with the last question, because it's a nice follow-up question. Was this your first micro front-end solution? Just because it also fits in nicely to the longer.
Actually, yes. I actually come from a background where I was doing before that, before I started with this product as an architect there, I was doing a lot of like front-end applications for media applications, so like stuff that you watch on very obscure devices like your consoles or set-top boxes or smart TVs. And this is obviously now the dream, that in a web environment, in a really web environment that runs in the browser, you have all these possibilities to do that, because sometimes these obscure devices also run on some JavaScript engine, but this is most of the times not a possibility to run like micro frontends because of certain limitations and stuff like that. So yes, it is actually now like the first time I'm working on a product or project even with micro frontend. Of course, we looked also into alternatives before we started, but that's already like 3-4 years ago. So it could be that my knowledge from back then is already outdated. But yeah.
I think we never regret solution, but that's just me saying that, right? But anyway, yeah, great.
It's important to point out that we never regretted the choice, right? So we really like it. We really love it because it fits perfectly to our need, like that we have like these different teams and different companies developing things on, and they get composed on the fly. And we even like things like that you can have multiple different technologies. I mean, we as Axenon, we loved TypeScript and React and everything, but we also need to anticipate that there are customers that may not be in favor of that technology. But I mean, they can then talk to me and I try to convince them, but maybe that even fails. Not possible, I guess. But who doesn't like that? But having the possibility to say like, okay, I'm not all in on this technology stack. I have the possibility with Pyro to also tell, okay, if I have a software development team and they do, I don't know, Blazor, whatever, you name it, Angular, you can still interact with the things there. Yeah, you will probably not be able to use the UI library and stuff like that. So, but you can still interact with the system and you can still like get your stuff in there. Also, like if you have legacy stuff, like we saw earlier, which was pretty enlightening to see, integrating legacy stuff, because I mean, we're in a world where not everything is a greenfield project. A lot of it is actually like somewhere where there's existing infrastructure and you don't want to throw away like your business just to start with a brand new thing. So keeping that in mind. So yeah, we absolutely love it. We never regretted the choice for going for Pyro.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool. So Ian and Dimitri, join us now again for the discussion and the remaining time. Hope you also found it interesting what Benjamin had to tell us so far. Maybe one question that I can now just put into the round, because it was also asked by HB. If you would start with the existing project, I mean, it could go to all of you in this case, right? Would you how would you gradually go from a single app architecture to a micro front end? What tools would you use? Would you just use the same stack again? Would you use something like an NX with a monorepo approach, or would you use like model federation? Would you use both? What are your takes on that?
It's an interesting question. I'd have to think about that a little bit. I don't think that there's one approach that is solving all of the problems in this area, and that there's one approach that boils the ocean. I'd go with the tooling that makes. I mean, the most important thing is to have the tooling that makes sense to your team, that you're able to understand, support, and maintain. And if that's NX and monorepos, that's great. If that isn't, because monorepos sometimes add some complexity for things, there are other solutions out there. I mean, especially if you're going with it from a single monolithic app, you're probably looking at your first micro front ends are going to be like a small piece rendered somewhere on the screen where you can pull out a feature from your monolith and say, okay, I just want to render this through that. And maybe that lends itself Maybe that lends itself better to mono repos. Yeah. I probably also wouldn't start with module federation if you're not already using that. And I mean, I know module federation is sometimes pitched as it's a way of solving micro frontends, but it's usable outside of a micro frontends context, and it doesn't necessarily solve all of your problems.
I mean, it's a tool, right? So
It's a tool.
it's like saying just because you use Docker, you're not doing microservices. I mean, Docker can be a great tool to set up something, and then, I don't know, to ship it to a Kubernetes cluster or spin up some app services, whatever, and feed it the images that you create there. But that's not the thing that you need at the end of the day. You need to think about communication. You need to think about reliability and all these things, and resilience. So, I mean, it can be one part of your solution, but it will never be the solution. That's, I think, important.
It's always, do I understand what this is doing? Is this going to be reliably working? Does this work for the cases I need to support? That's always
great. Then, or maybe anyone else? Benjamin, your take on this question?
No, I agree that it's complicated.
Maybe my take. I mean, I come, of course, from the Pyro world. My recommendation is always start simple. So if there is no need to put something in a micro frontend because, there's a dedicated team working on that, or because it's a feature you need to toggle on or off or something, just put it in your app shell like you would put in a monolithic app. But then you can always then see, does this thing need its own life cycle? Does it need to be toggled or whatever, right? And then you can always still put it in a micro frontend. And this way you very naturally go in that direction. And sure, monorepos can be also a tool for that. If you already put that thing in a dedicated package in a monorepo, then it can be even easier migrate to a micro frontend, right? Because all you need to do is, either switch how the thing is built or just move it into now dedicated repository, whatever you want to do. But at the end of the day, these are just tools. Tools are what makes our life then easier, more convenient, so they are definitely important. But there are multiple decisions, and I think Ian phrased it really well. Need to see what makes sense for your team and make the right decision there. Talk to the people, get some insights, and then make a decision.
It's also important to understand your monolith, right? So to understand okay, well, what are things even that would make sense to break apart, and what would be these interfaces between them, and design it on a whiteboard or whatever. Because you can start with, I want to have microservices, micro frontends, and then you end up still having one micro frontend that is now loaded dynamically, but it has still everything in there. So trying to understand your domains, trying to module it, and then once you're there, your dream separation of concern that you would have, basically, that you would see, then you can see and try to find actionable plans how to move there, basically, starting up with a shell application and then trying to move in the stuff one by one. And there may be bigger pieces that you then later break apart still or whatever, but trying from that angle.
Cool. One of the questions from David Dust that was asked at the Ozone presentation, but let's bring it up here, and I think it can be also generalized a bit, but I think it gears first towards Dimitri and Ian. You pretty much answered it already a bit, but maybe can go in a little bit more detail. What are the micro frontend discovery method that you used? With a single SPA approach, you must use import maps. What's the replacement? You still use import maps, but can you go a little bit into details there?
So we're actually in the middle of a transition right now in what we're doing. I said we're aiming to keep our application right now as static files. So our ultimate answer to what is the micro frontend discovery method is we now have a JSON document that describes all of our pages, all of our extensions, all of our components, where and how they get rendered, and that's basically our replacement for the import maps. We're still using import maps, but we're using them not as a discovery mechanism, but just as a code mapping tool, which is what import maps really are. Right.
You say, so that you know where the JavaScript files are from these names of the micro frontends, right?
Exactly. but everything is, we have the name of the micro front end and we have specific things, very similar to the code Benjamin was showing earlier with like register page that says this URL, register this thing, some controls around that and all that sort of thing.
Great. Okay. Good. And one more question that we got also during the Ozone presentation was from Mugatu. A nice profile image there. What about testing and sharing component libraries between applications?
So yeah, this gets really hard. For capacity reasons, we haven't gone the direction that Benjamin was explaining, where they have a very nice full UI library out there for people to use. As you saw in our demo, we're relying very heavily on the Carbon design system as the basis for that, and so we are using Carbon's React library to provide shared components that are used across most of our front ends. We do have a few custom things that are loaded into. We have a core library that we call the framework that's available in our application at all times. And we do have some shared components that are in there, but in general, sharing components can get a little there's a little bit of a question about whether or not that's the right move when you're dealing with micro front ends and any sort of microservice, because those shared components now become a tightly coupled sort of thing, right? Where application A might depend on this version of application. So you need to be careful about how you're sharing them and making sure that, if you're going to update some sort of shared library, that either everything is isolated enough that it only affects a handful of things, or that you can upgrade everything at one time. Our testing strategy is very so we do have tests at all sorts of different levels, but our main source of testing is to run end-to-end tests across an integrated application. It's simply, when you have all of these different components being pulled in from different places, it's simply the only thing you can do to make sure that everything is going to work the way you want it to work. And so that's where we're focusing a lot of our testing energy on.
Okay, cool. All right. Then a question to all of you. I mean, that question was asked specifically to Benjamin, but I think it also makes sense because you mentioned the OpenMRS framework and libraries like that. Sorry, wrong question here from Kirillo. The UI library, are you using a private NPM registry to distribute that? If yes, is it using something like Verdaccio, or is it based on Nexus? Maybe the Azure Artifact registry. What are you using there?
No, so we are actually using the full public NPM registry. We're publishing it. We have the approach anyway that, like, all the code that we have, like the templates, like the customizable services that you start from, they are on GitHub. You clone them, and then you don't need to, like, I mean, you need to sign up with like the on portluxem.com. Quick plug. You can sign up for a free trial and you can start with that. But the technical things are publicly available. So the code is on GitHub for the customizable parts. And we have the libraries published to NPM. We even ship them with the source code there because we think it makes it easier for developers than to or like with source maps and source code, I think even. And it makes it easy to debug into the library, because if the library doesn't do what you expect, I mean, we're in the way that we're in that moment where the library, or like the thing that is supposed to help you, stands in your way, right? And we try to avoid that, and we say, like, okay, then we give you the source code. You can have a look at it, and if something is wrong in there, point a finger at us and say, like, wait, you guys do something wrong there, and we will fix it. We can discuss if it's actually wrong or not, or whatever. But ultimately, it's like about transparency and helping like developers achieve the goal. But I was using Verdaccio in another thing before, like when working on the other applications, and had kind of good experience with that. So I'm not sure if that helps.
Yeah. By the way, the Pirate Feed service also can act as an npm registry. So if you buy that, you get also a Kick-Ass npm registry for free that you can use for private packages. But in general, I like the public approach because, I mean, you want to, in the end of the day, also empower your users to have their own front ends, and so they need to have access to these libraries, and having them as much as possible. And easy access is, I think, really key. And I think for OpenMRS, Dimitri, that's also the key, right? So all the libraries are, of course, also publicly available on the public npm registry, right? So you can check out the OpenMRS framework, for instance. These are all there, right?
We're all open source. It's all of our source code is basically on GitHub. You can look through it to your heart's content.
Yeah.
We do have some organizations that publish when they're developing their distributions. They'll publish things privately to internal repos, but in general, we try to be as open as possible.
Cool. One question from David does, because we talked before about the testing area. I don't know, can you share anything about the end-to-end testing processes, Dimitri?
Yeah, I mean, specifically for OpenMRS 3 and Ozone, we use Playwright, but I'm really not that, fussy about it. It works well. Yeah, it's great. No problem. We support multiple languages. But I think this is a bit of a secondary question to a large extent. It's more important to have these processes in place. I think end-to-end testing is a process-driven thing more than really a technology thing. But Playwright is great, so go ahead.
Yeah, we also
by coincidence, we also use that. But I don't think there's no relation to if you use Micro Frontends, you use Playwright. So.
No, there's no. But I mean, I used in the past a lot of frameworks, like starting with Nightwatch, Cypress. I mean, all the things that you read about. I mean, Selenium first, just plain Selenium. But these days we're also quite stuck on Playwright. We even started using it when there was no dedicated test framework for it. So just the Playwright adapter, and you put it into Jest, for instance. But these days we're using it with it's still, I think, using Jest under the hood, I'm not sure, but with the dedicated Playwright test framework. And I think it's actually, it fulfills its job, right? And as Dimitri said, important thing is that you set up these processes and you make up your mind. What do you then test? Do you need to test a variety of configurations? I don't know, different micro frontend combinations, or do you test one thing that for one standard user, or how do you define these personas, these flows, and keeping them up to date and maintained is always also important. So because new features come in more frequently than you update the test code bases, at least to our experience. And so you need to do that. And of course, when you make updates, you need to potentially still maintain this thing, even though Playwright made it a lot easier to maintain, in my opinion, than what we had, for instance, with Nightwatch. Still, Nightwatch is great, but I think Playwright is now, in my opinion, still the thing to go to. Make no mistake, whatever you feel comfortable with is a good choice. In my opinion.
I think over the past 4 years, we went through this rather rapid cycle. We had some legacy UI tests in Selenium, so our first go-to was just let's leverage that, and then that wasn't working out so well. We went to Cypress because it was a little bit easier, ran into problems, and landed on Playwright just because it made everything so much simpler.
Yeah. Right. Question from Mark. How can I make a micro frontend communicate with another micro frontend? Is there something like a RabbitMQ for micro frontends? For instance, also things that are made up with Blazor. Let's maybe first exclude the Blazor part and talk about that.
I mean, the idea of implementing an event bus inside a JavaScript application is really not hard. Frankly, modern JavaScript provides you with all of the primitives that you need. If you want, there are a few libraries out there that will do it for you, but you can just publish DOM events and subscribe to those, and that can work too. That's not what we use, but it is a feasible solution.
Well, I think it's a great solution. I mean, under the hood, or even in Pyro, I mean, you get a dedicated event emitter, so to speak, where you can have publish and, of course, subscribe there. But under the hood, it also just uses a custom event. All it does, it namespaces this, that it doesn't conflict with other custom events, and it makes sure that, it stays within the same instance. But I mean, that's all about it. And so all microfrontends can share that. Quite often, however, the thing is that, I mean, events are sometimes necessary, but most things you can actually cover with these components, right? So with these, what we call in Pyro extension components, because quite often what you actually want is not to just throw something out that someone picks it up, but to say, here, I want to render something, and I give you the following data in there, right? Because then using this data, something meaningful is done and rendered on the screen. I'm not saying events are completely obsolete, but very often the solution you are looking for is actually a component already, because if you publish an event that now, I don't know, the counter changed, and all it does is it's picked up somewhere, and then this component that displays the counter is updating. I mean, you could also just change the props to the counter, the attributes, or whatever you want to call it, and it would also change. There's no event needed, and especially that's important. Sometimes you don't need to publish it because it's only necessary for rendering time, right? So the component also makes more sense. Again, it's not always the case, but in most cases that I've seen, component makes more sense. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, if you start like, I don't worry too much about micro frontends communicating, because it's about, part of this is about designing interfaces so that you can reduce the coupling between your different components as much as possible. So the sort of cross micro front-end communication should either be something that your components are naturally doing, or they don't need to communicate at all.
Right.
We use in the whole system, I think, maybe, if at all, a handful of events that are like global events that are just fired. And it's usually like for the cases where you, I don't know, set something like you want to inform everybody that the application is right now busy, and now it's not busy anymore. So you don't have like a known consumer, and you don't know what should be the action because of that. Every time you have that, an answer, like you know who it is that consumes it, or you know what should be the behavior, then probably an extension or another concept is a better one. This is really about broadcasting something out where different parties may react in unknown ways to you. But this is actually, if we look at our application, for instance, really, really rare that this is that we need. But it's totally possible, of course. And then, as Florian said, it's like every use case is made different, and mileage made.
I will try to answer the question for Blazor. Yes, it's possible to get in touch with us. We know Blazor quite well, and we also know how we can do Micro Frontends with Blazor. And there's not only the Pyro way, by the way, but also with Pyro, Blazor works, I would say, quite well. So that's would be my answer for the second part. Unless someone else says, I got more knowledge in Blazor, or decent knowledge and wants also to take that one, I would leave it at this. No. Okay. Also, looking at the time, since we're approaching the end, I mean, there are still some questions out there, so let's try to cover them. This one is, I think, a really good one from Drashko. Does the micro frontend approach make any sense for a small team? And maybe everyone, we just make the round. What's your take? Yes or no, Benjamin?
I mean,
it depends.
Very often in the software architecture world and whatever in designing the system, it depends on your use case and what you want to do. I mean, if I want to implement a Hello World application, I may not throw a micro frontend framework at it. I may do that in an appropriate way. I would say, on the other hand, on the contrary, having just 5 people or like a small team or whatever should not rule out micro frontends for you. So if that's like, I mean, if you get successful, maybe the team grows or whatever, or like you have very separate domains and you have domain experts already on that team, that makes sense. Or you need to target different release cycles. So stuff where you're like, okay, I mean, this thing has a much higher cadence in how often it's getting released, this not. It heavily depends. So I would not say it's absolutely doesn't make sense if you have a small team. No, it's not dependent on team size. I mean, yeah, I would even probably do it if I'm one person, if the use case needs it, right?
All right. Dimitri, your take. Agreed? Disagreed?
No, I would agree. I think the questions oversimplify. Looking just at that dimension, we would be tempted to say probably not, but it's obfuscating a lot of other realities that may chime in. And it's true, maybe that will prevent you to scale, maybe, the release cycles, different cycle, that's a good point as well. So it's difficult to answer that question like this. I would say more on its face value, no, but not.
That's also a good answer. No, I mean, it's all just opinions here. Ian?
I mean, I don't have a lot to add. Like, team size is probably not the main consideration, but like if you're a small team just starting out with a greenfield application, maybe adopting a micro front-end architecture is going to take away from your initial velocity in getting the app written. But at the same time, it's not really a matter of team size. It is really a matter of if you want the sort of features that you get from micro front ends or not, or if you need those, if you have a complex enough problem or a domain that really can benefit from having some degree of isolation and separation of concerns across domains, then I mean, there's no reason you can't do this with 3 people.
Yeah. I mean, all good points. My take on this is I fully agree to Dimitri. This one metric makes it sound like sure, don't go for it. I mean, but other metrics, of course, can be also used. Just an example: the websites like for the conference Micro Frontends Cloud, for this meetup Micro Frontends Cloud, for this survey that I presented in the beginning. These are all just monoliths, because we just spit them out. They are fairly easy to digest and everything. So it's marketed with our small team, like essentially fitting this 5 front-end developers, smaller than 5 front-end developers. I mean, it just makes sense to have monoliths. But for instance, the product we have, the Pirate Cloud feed service, this is still fully feature-based. So even with our small develop capacity, we are just using microfrontends, and we have, I think around 35 microfrontends or pilots in there, because this allows us to have for different, let's say, instances, different compositions there very easily, and also toggle these features on the fly. So even if there's, a feature included for, license key management, and depending on what kind of user you are, you get it or you don't get it. So we can then control these kinds of levels. So for us, it made sense. But then it's not, in this case, about the, let's say, splitting for a team size, because it's still just one team, but splitting based on features. So it can make sense, but it really depends on the metric that you look at. In general, I mean, my general statement would be, if you have a monolith and everything works out, there's no technical or organizational reason to change, remain at the monolith, right? So, but otherwise, microfrontends can be a great tool, a great mindset to go into solve a real problem, right? Looking at the time, final question. Maybe then we already need to close. It was a blast. From HP again. Is it the guy from Scooter? That also says from HP. But anyway, so outdated app libs are old. Is it easier to start from scratch? Like doing a microfrontend approach just to rewrite is a good call, because we can show old app while developing new feature and importing only parts. So might it be a good, maybe again, let's do the round, also with some closing words. Maybe let's do the other direction this time. Ian, what's your take on this?
I see the word rewrite in the question, and I get a little nervous when people start talking about rewrites, because every time you look at an application, you will say, I can do this much easier. This is way too complicated, and then you lose a lot of complexity. You end up with something that might not be
the
as
old Netscape rewrite, right? The horror story.
Exactly. I mean, we are building on top of the OpenMRS backend has been in existence since 2006, and we are still moving that forward, even though a lot of the patterns that are in use are things that make me pull my hair out, what little I have left these days.
That's software.
It's software. I mean, a micro front-end approach can be a good way of breathing new life into a legacy application where change has become blocked, and it's become hard, because it gives you a way of separating out something, and you can say, okay, this is the new thing. But yeah, I just because things are outdated and just because the libraries are old, it doesn't necessarily mean you should be rewriting.
May not get better. It will for the start, but after a year, stuff can be outdated again, also for microfrontends.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was jumping in the line.
Yeah, Dimitri, what's your take?
I don't know. It's a question of, complexity of the existing stack and the pressure you operate under. There's so many factors again that come here. I think with experience, you tend to be smart about like migrating progressively and not rewriting everything from scratch. So, yeah, maybe it sounds like it could be a way. Like we did that to some extent ourselves with OpenMRS, and I think I like this kind of practical approach. So in the end result is not as sexy as rewriting, but you get there, and that's what matters. At the end of the day, you get hit by real world considerations, and those are the ones that make you sleep tight at night. So yeah, I would say, yeah, I'm not a big fan of rewriting everything all the time, I would say, but I used to be when I was younger.
I can tell you war stories from either side, right? So things where I wished then after some time to have rewritten, and also things where I say it was stupid to rewrite. So there are both directions. And I always, after each project, I think I'm now smarter, but then the next thing comes up and I'm like, what to do now? Usually I think it's a good call to not rewrite, but just to think about what would you gain, what do you lose? Because I mean, there are, of course, all these experience reports out there from people that say, I can do that much better. And of course, it first works much better. It's faster. I don't know. Code base is much simpler. But then suddenly there start to come in complaints of this thing is not behaving like it should and this. And you're like, well, why? And more edge cases arrive, and suddenly you realize, well, the old code base wasn't just so complex. It just took care of all the things that you didn't consider so far, right? So just because you use now a new, shinier framework or whatever doesn't mean you now solve now the problems in a better way. And that's always something you need to consider. That's at least my 5 cents. Benjamin, also war stories to tell here. Have you been hurt in the past by such rewrites? And I have been.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't think I have much to add. I basically agree with what you stated. So it's really like, I mean, I always also hate that answer. Like we need to get more information to make a call there, whatever. But I guess that's also the point, right? Rewrite is not a silver bullet by any means. It's not like, well, you rewrite and then everything will be great. You may end up in the same problem, but with a different language. So yeah, it's a tough call. Like, I mean, the question would already be like, is it even feasible to trade velocity going into feature development, and maybe potentially could be put into cleaning up the thing, putting that and opening it basically another battlefield that may end up well or not, depending on like circumstances and fortune. There's no yes or no, right? But I would be also careful with like rewrite and now everything's solved. That's usually a false assumption, or like it is not say. I'm not saying it's never worked out, but most often than not, it's not necessarily solving all the problems. You may inherit your problems still also in the new thing.
Cool. All right. With that, nice closing words. Thanks for joining today. Thanks also to everyone in the audience who watched it live or on demand later on. It was a blast. Also, of course, keep an eye on LinkedIn, Twitter, the usual channels, meetup.microfrontends. We will announce the next one for August soon. And I wish everyone now a great rest of the week. Enjoy in the upcoming weekend, TGIF. All right. And, well, see you soon then. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Thank you.